Good morning, Goose. Welcome back to Goose Unlimited. Today we are going to get right into it. We are going to be covering lapping your scope rings, why you do it, why you may not need to do it, and some things to consider whenever buying scope rings. Right here in front of us we have the Arkin Optics SH4 Gen 2 6 to 24 by 50. Very affordable scope, lots of bells and whistles, all this other stuff with it. It is mounted in the Arkin Optics 34 millimeter single piece scope mount. Typically, when you are lapping your scope rings, you're going to want to do this on the actual firearm, unless you have that single piece mount. That single piece mount, the rings aren't going to move from each other. With two piece rings, you want them mounted on the firearm so that whenever you're done lapping them, they will remain right where they're supposed to be, and everything's going to stay true, because that's what you're essentially doing, it truing the front ring to the rear ring and make sure everything's nice and flush. Why would you need to lap your rings for your scope? Well, older manufacturers, when they made their rings, they always made them in two pieces. Rarely ever was it one solid piece of aluminum or steel back then. And what you would have is, if they manufactured this rear ring and then in a different run manufactured the front ring, if there was any variance in the tolerances when they manufactured it, the center of the rings may not be perfectly true to the outside, or they may not be perfectly true one to the other. So what you would find is that you would put your rings on your rifle, you would put your scope in, and then you would tighten it down, and you would figure out that as you're tightening one, the other one may not be as tight, and it's causing a pressure point on the optic on one ring but not the other, or you'll find that it's creating a pressure point on the optic on the top of the rear ring and the bottom of the front ring as it's trying to hold it straight. And this would lead to cause problems with the actual optics itself, because people didn't realize they were clamping down the scope rings and actually damaging the external tube, which in turn could mess up the internals of the scope. Today, if you buy from a reputable manufacturer, it's typically machined as one piece, meaning that even this one piece mount, this bottom piece as well as the top of the rings are machined at one time from one piece of aluminum. There are some companies who will sell you rings that are two pieces that are still manufactured from one piece of material. I think Tally is a brand that does that. So you've got one block of steel or aluminum, and they will drill the bore for the center of the rings all at one time, machine the outside of the rings, and then later on cut the tops and the rings apart from each other so that you get a very straight bore through the front and the rear rings. So if you go with a reputable manufacturer that does it all from one piece, most likely you're not going to have to lap the rings. It's going to be trued all the way through with no problems. If you go with a less reputable manufacturer, or a manufacturer that has a great reputation but may machine their rings from two different pieces of material, you might find yourself needing to true up the rings, the front to the rear. Whenever you lap your rings on a firearm, if you have a two-piece rings and you decide you're going to move them from that firearm to another firearm, let's say you got a Picatinny mount and you decide to sell the rifle but you keep the scope and the rings, whenever you go through and mount those rings onto the new rifle, it is recommended that you check to see if they're still true. If not, you may need to lap them again. If you look close enough on these rings here, you may notice that this side of the rings or that side of the rings don't perfectly line up. With this particular setup, what I did is I took them out of the box. I did not keep track of the orientation of the top rings. So I don't know which one is supposed to be the top or the front or the rear top. I don't know even which direction they're supposed to be facing. So that's something that I'm going to have to figure out. So whenever you do get your scope mount or your scope rings, try to keep the rings, the top and the bottoms together, and keep them in the correct orientation, front to rear. Don't flip them around or turn them or swap them out. Because chances are, if they did machine them out of one piece of material, they kept the correct top with the correct bottom in the correct orientation so that everything lines up nice and flush, and then you don't have to go back through and try to figure out which way it should go. I highly recommend whenever you take them out of the package that you mark them. You want to mark front and rear, and you want to mark orientation where the front is, or where the rings are going to face. Because if not, you end up in a situation like me where you might have the wrong ring here. And that is going to make a difference whenever you go to see if you need to lap your rings or not. To do the ring lapping, I have a Wheeler's Engineering lapping kit. This is specifically for the 34mm tube. If you've got a 30mm tube or a 1-inch tube, they sell kits for those as well. I've purchased one of each because I have all three sizes of rings. In each kit, you're going to have your truing pieces. That's going to tell you how much further you need to go. These 2 points, if you put them in the rings and they are perfectly aligned to one another, then you don't have to true it up. You don't have to lap it. But if there's a little bit of an offset, then you're going to want to lap the rings until you get them straight. You've got 220 grit compound there, which to lap, you'd put it on the lapping bar itself. Now the lapping bar, this is what you're actually doing all the work with. You put the handle on it, you apply some of that 220 grit to it, a nice thin coat. Then you put it into the rings, and then you tighten the rings down, but not all the way, and then you move it back and forth, and it will polish the inside of the rings and true them up. Like I said before, depending on how bad the rings are offset from one another will determine how much you actually have to lap. As you can see here, I removed the scope from the mount. I marked the front ring, and the orientation of the ring caps are based off the logo on the top. Those are pointing forward. I've also lined up the rings the best that I could to make sure that they are true. Off camera, I installed both of the alignment bars, and hopefully you guys can see it as well as I can. They look beautiful. I'm looking at them. You want to look at them from the front, the top. You want to look at them from every direction. And I think that these rings are good to go. I don't want to mess with them. They look great. We're going to check out the other set of rings, see how well they come out, and then go from there. So I've got the second scope mounted up in the jig. I've got the alignment bars in, tightened down, and I'm getting the same results as the first optic mount. The alignment bars, they look great. I hope you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. The very points of the alignment bars are right on point, no pun intended. I'm really surprised. I expected to have to lap these things at least 3 or 4 passes to just clean it up, but they look great. I am not going to lap these. I will end up posting another video of a different optic that I mounted that will show the process of actually lapping it if you guys are interested in it. But for this project, there's not a need to for either of the mounts or for either of the uppers. So we're going to call it right there. In our next video, we're actually going to mount the mounts onto the rifles, mount the scopes, line them up, and then possibly bore sight them. If we have time, we'll take them out and zero them on the range. So once again, I just want to say thank you to Davis Mechanical Contractors. These lights are working great. This is how I had it set up. I had the ring light with the stand right in front of the vise, and then I had the top mount right there hooked up onto the shelf so that you guys could see what I was working on there. I'm extremely satisfied with these lights. I appreciate them very much. If you guys are in the Houston area, don't forget to check out Davis Mechanical Contractors for all your AC and heating needs. See you later, Goose.